Hello, book bellas and fellas. I am here doing a wrap up for the books that I read in January. January was a really rough month for me. I ended up getting my first chest cold that I've had in over 4 years, and I have asthma, so I really struggled with that. I was sick for about 2 weeks, just struggling with it, and for the first week I was struggling to breathe. So it was a pretty intense thing. I really didn't have the focus to read very much at the beginning of the month because of that. So I didn't get a ton read. I got 6 books read, which for what I got read wasn't a terrible number considering how sick I was. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into the books that I read in the month of January. I wanted to start off with some of my goals that I had for 2019, which is to read a wider variety of authors. And so I ended up reading Pride by E.B. Zeboy. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice in Brooklyn. This follows our main character, Zuri, who is this girl who has 2 sisters, very rich people, just bought the house across the street and fixed it up. So we are introduced to all of these characters on the day that these new neighbors are moving into the fancy house across the street. Of course, the neighbors are called the Darcy family in traditional Pride and Prejudice fashion, and I really liked how they did that. It's funny because Zuri is supposed to be the Elizabeth Bennet of our story. She loves to read, she's very intelligent, she's very outspoken, and she never shies away from telling you exactly what's on her mind, which also stayed very true to this character. Now, I really like the fact that they called her sister Janae, which is also very consistent with what they originally had in Pride and Prejudice, where the older sister of the family was called Jane. So there was a lot of little parallels, like little tidbits like that they threw in. I really liked how smooth the romance was in this. And of course, the amount of angst that our main character experienced when she met Darius Darcy, who is Pride and Prejudice fashion, is actually supposed to be Darcy, but they don't call him Darcy. That's his last name this time, which is still wonderful. And I really liked how they incorporated the neighborhood into this and the community experience, not just the main Pride and Prejudice plot. The thing about the original Pride and Prejudice is that the atmosphere and the conditions and everything else that were in the story were a major part of everything that was going on in this story. And so Elizabeth Bennet in the original Pride and Prejudice was always being very pressured to find a man, to find a marriage, find a mate. And I felt like that there wasn't nearly as much pressure because it's modern day. So I felt like it was very true to the time period in which it originated. There was less pressure aside from, her being very intrigued by Darius Darcy. This was also very good incorporating the family and people that surrounded Darius Darcy into the mix as well. You really got to see a good viewpoint of both of our main characters, and all of the major plot points and all the major characters that were in the original Pride and Prejudice do have parts in here that were just really stood out. I really loved this book so much. It was a really good read, and if you are a fan of Pride and Prejudice, this is really just a perfect book for you because it really felt like it stayed true to the original plot line, while also being able to add on and expand in the setting that it was placed. So the next book that I read is also based around my 2019 goals of trying to expand my reading taste. Of course, I read a book by this author towards the end of last year and absolutely loved it, so I wanted to continue on with other books by her because her nonfiction books are really good. I actually read another book by her and I really loved it. So this book is actually by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and it's called We Should All Be Feminists. This was actually, I guess, a retelling of her TED Talk, which I really enjoyed. So I really actually preferred this book, Dear Ejeweli, or Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. The reason why I preferred this book over this book, to be perfectly honest, is I felt like this book covered some of the topics that were in here, but this covered a wider variety of the topics. And so this is more based on her TED Talk, while this one is this introduction on how to raise your kids to be a feminist. And I really felt I got more out of this one than this one. And don't get me wrong, I still really did enjoy this. I still felt like it touched on a lot of really good points. But I felt like if you are looking for an introduction to feminism or you don't really know much about it, I feel like this had more value to me as somebody who was seeking to get more into feminism and the ideals that surround it. Part of one of the things I want to do in my wrap-ups this year is also, I have a quote book that I put my favorite quotes in from the books that I read every month. And I kind of wanted to get more into talking about some of the quotes I really enjoyed from this previous month. So one of the quotes that I really loved for this particular book, We Should All Be Feminists, is some people asks, why the word feminist? Why not just say you are a believer of human rights or something like that? Because the word would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, part of human rights in general, but to choose to use the vague expression of human rights is to deny the specific problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending that it was not women who have, for centuries, been excluded. It would be a way of denying the problem of gender targets feminism. That the problem was not about being human, but specifically about being a female human. For centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and proceeded to exclude and oppress one group. It is only fair the solution to the problem should acknowledge that. That really hit home with me. I loved that quote. It was one of my favorite quotes out of the entire book. And while it was kind of lengthy, I really felt like it really expressed why the term feminism is so important to the feminist movement. So that was amazing. So the next two books that I read were a huge deal to me because these are books that I had been waiting to read for the longest time, and they were on several TBRs that I had on previous months, and I just never quite got around to them because I was a little bit nervous about starting them for the simple fact that I was so worried. Well, for one, I'm a huge fan of Brandon Sanderson. I was just like, okay, I'm getting down to the bottom of the barrel of his completed series that I haven't read, and so that was one thing. And then the next thing that I was really getting to is the fact that this book has been so far hyped that I wasn't even sure how it was going to live up to how much hype everybody was giving it, but it did a fantastic job. So those books are Mistborn and The Well of Ascension. I actually ended up reading both of these. I have never tabbed a book so much in my entire life. These books are just completely tabbed up. Now, I don't have a system for tabbing. It's just kind of constructive chaos. But the point is that I can find everything in here, you know, maybe like not by just looking at the tabs, but by going through it and just kind of, you know, looking at it to see, you know, like my favorite parts, key plot points, quotes that I really enjoyed. I actually buddy read this with a Daydream book reader, which I will put her link down in the description. It was a lot of fun being able to talk about this book with somebody while you were reading it. And I just want to thank her so much for the opportunity to buddy read a book with her. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to do that with you. This book has something called allomancers in it. Allomancers actually can eat metals, and every metal serves a particular purpose. Because of that, there are also mistings. The mistings can only burn one type of metal, and they can only utilize the ability of one type of metal. They don't have the ability to use them all. Mistborns, on the other hand, can eat any metal as long as it's pure, and they can utilize those abilities. They are extremely powerful. Of course, you find out like that some Mistborns are more powerful than others, but I have to tell you that I was on the edge of my seat. There were points in this book where I felt, especially like during the fourth part, like I felt like he really was foreshadowing very heavily. And so there was a few things about the main character, the Lord Ruler, that I kind of suspected before I got there. Now, don't get me wrong, that did not decrease the amount of enjoyment that I had in the book. It's just that I kind of saw a few things coming, and I wish I hadn't have seen them coming. But overall, this book was phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. And it was just such a pleasure. No spoilers, but this book has it's not a completely different vibe, but it's different from the first book. Still really enjoyed it. I don't want to say too much about The Well of Ascension, and I'm getting ready to start The Hero of Ages here soon. I've already kind of gotten a few pages into it, and I'm also very much enjoying it. These books were everything that I had wanted them to be and more. And this one right here, I felt like this was a great book, but I felt like this one really stepped it up a notch, and I actually really much enjoyed this one over this one. Not saying that I didn't love them both, because they were both really phenomenal, but this one really stepped things up a notch, and I hear that the third book, The Hero of Ages, is going to be even better. So I am very much looking forward to this. I highlighted these, I just devoured them, and they were just brilliant. If you are intimidated by fantasy, these are bigger books. But if you're intimidated by fantasy, these are not hard fantasies to devour. These are not hard fantasies to read. Even if you were looking for a way to get introduced to epic fantasy, if you are whatever age you are, because it's very tastefully done. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter if you have problems with epic fantasies. These books are very reader friendly. They are very fascinating. This one threw me through so many loops, and I love loops. I love curveballs. Bring it on. I love it all. So yes, this was just so amazing, and I cannot wait to get the third one. So there was actually a quote from the first Mistborn book that I really loved, and I did want to share that with you guys because I just loving and fangirling all over the Mistborn. You know, it's a messy business being a fangirl because all the feels and all that. Just wonderful. So there's actually a couple quotes from here. The first one is, "The only reason to be subservient to those with power is so that you can learn to someday take what they have." I loved that one. It was just so angsty. And then the second one is, "Belief isn't simply a thing for fair times and bright days. I think. What is belief? What is faith? If you don't continue in it after its failure." And that's beautiful too. Like some of the things that are in this, and I have to say that for the Mistborn series, my favorite character so far is Sazed, I think is how his name is pronounced. He's a badass, and he's brilliant. He's an intellectual, and I really feel like I connect with him on a personal level, especially towards the end of the second book. Something really big happens, and I don't want to say too much more than that. And I just feel like I just connected with him so much more, and I cannot wait for more of him. He's brilliant. So the next book that I read is Neil Gaiman, Art Matters Because Imagination Can Change the World. Let me get this a little bit closer. And it's actually illustrated by Chris Rydell. Chris Rydell is a pretty popular illustrator. Okay, so there's a lake out back. I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but somebody has their airboat, and it is 10 o'clock at night, and they're outside playing with their airboat. I don't even know why. So if you guys can hear that, I apologize. Kind of distracting a little, but we're going to move on with this. So this book is nonfiction, and it basically just goes into why art matters. The table of contents goes as this. It goes credo, and then the second section is why your future depends on libraries, reading, and daydreaming. And then the second one is making a chair, and then the last one is make good art. Okay, so this actually, I really loved a lot of the quotes in this. The illustrations are just very simple, black and white. You have a little librarian there. And it was a very easy read, but this is one I've been meaning to read for a very long time. I felt like it was very inspirational, and I felt like it was such a breath of fresh air. It is considered a nonfiction book, and while it is super easy to read, it also packs a heck of a punch. I really appreciated the voice that Neil Gaiman gives to artists and to libraries, and why we need both so badly, and why it's so important that we continue to try to support these things. I know a lot of libraries have been disappearing on and off from public schools, and it's a really big concern because those are really important. I know that they could be a safe haven for a lot of people, and it's one of the few places that you can go to just breathe and not be expected to spend any money, and just go and just be. And so I feel like these libraries are very important, and I feel like a lot of that was conveyed in this book, and I feel like it was conveyed very well. It also talks about a little bit about the artist process, and how sometimes you fight to have your own voice as an artist, as a creator, and in a lot of cases, you end up mimicking other people that you really admire because you're having trouble finding your own voice. And I feel like that is a process, an artistic process, a lot of creators and artists really do go through, and I feel like I've really related to that. Sometimes, you watch people and you see their process and you think that's how my process is supposed to be. But sometimes it's also about just kind of finding your own way through these things like that you're struggling with. And art really is a process, and you build on it and you get better. And I really liked how it conveyed all of those things. So one of the things like that I really loved about this, one of my quotes like that I really, really adored from this, it said, "Fiction is the lie that tells the truth. We all have an obligation to daydream. We have an obligation to imagine. It is easy to pretend that nobody can change anything. The society is huge and the individual is less than nothing. But the truth is, individuals make the future, and they do it by imagining that things can be different." So that quote kind of just rings in my head about how imagination makes the impossible possible, and I loved it so much. The last book that I read for the month of January is In an Absent Dream by Shannon McGuire. Of course, this is a very short book, and it is the fourth book in the Wayward Children series. The Wayward Children series is a portal fantasy about a house where they take in kids who have gone to other worlds and are having trouble adapting back to our world. And they don't really feel like they fit in, and they got so used to being in those worlds and doing the things the way that they were doing them in their world that when they got back here, they hadn't quite adapted. And so the first book in there was amazing, and I absolutely loved it. And they all seem like, especially the add-ons, like after like that was kind of an introduction from our world to theirs. And the preceding 3 books, including this one, go into other worlds and other types of worlds that you get to encounter. In the first world, it was a very dark world. It had vampires and everything else. The second world was very unstructured. It was kind of very chaotic. And this one was extremely structured. So you get a little taste of everything. And she's not done writing these books yet. So I'm definitely in the tradition now, after reading the first 3 last year, of making sure that I pick these up every year that they come out until she decides to stop making them. This follows our main character, Catherine Lundy, and she is very bookish. She never feels like she fits in. She's kind of always has a book in her hand, and one day she goes to the park and she sees this tree, and this tree just kind of pops up out of nowhere, and the tree, as it's springing up, decides to form a door that she walks through, and which you can kind of see on the cover. That's exactly what happens. And it really is a reflection of how she gets there. I don't know how much I want to say about this, but if you guys met the therapist in the first book, then this book is all about how the therapist became who she was in that book, because this is actually a prequel to the first book. I loved this book. I can't say I loved it more than I loved the other ones, which is probably a very unpopular opinion. I did like the structure. I did like how they set up the world. I did like the ideas behind it. They had a character in here called Moon, and I know I kind of felt bad for her, but at the same time, I don't feel like that she had a lot of personal growth, and I don't feel like she learned her mistakes very well. And I felt like the main character kept helping her out of the main character's heart, which made the main character extremely likable. But I feel like that I didn't really bond as much, even with the main character, as I had hoped I would. While I felt like she was very relatable in so many ways, because, she's a reader just like I am, and she felt like very outcasted, which I do quite a bit, actually. And so I feel that there was a lot to love about this character, but I don't feel like I was ever able to get on a much deeper emotional connection, aside from the things like that were probably just a little bit, I felt like a little bit repetitive in fiction, which is fine. It's just, as much as I loved the tropes for, the feeling outcasted and the bookishness and everything else, I don't feel like that it was deeply emotional enough for me that I absolutely fell in love with the character. Now, I did really enjoy reading this book. In spite of that, I thought the world was very interesting and I really appreciated it, but it wasn't my favorite so far in the series. I'm not stopping from reading any of the other ones. I'm going to continue to read any of the other books that she puts out for it, because this really is a wonderful series. It really is enjoyable, but this, in comparison to the other books, fell a little short for me. One of the things I love about those Shannon McGuire books more than anything is the fact that they are just very deeply penetrating, and they have wonderful quotes. And I feel like when she writes with her whole heart. And so how these books are written is just absolutely beautiful. I do want to share a few things as far as like quotes that I had gotten from those as well. This was one of the ones I love. Home always shrinks in times of absence, always bleeds away some of its majesty. Because what is home after all, apart from the place one returns to when the adventure is over? Home is an end to glory, a stopping point when the tale is done. I thought that was absolutely beautiful. I absolutely loved that. And it was just another one of the quotes that I absolutely loved from this past month. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you guys like this video, hit the little like, hit the little bell icon if you want to receive emails every time I post, and don't forget to hit subscribe. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you guys watching. It's wonderful that you guys come here to watch my videos. If you guys want to connect on any of my other social media, I have a Twitter account, an Amazon account, Goodreads account, and an Instagram, which are all linked in the bottom below. And as always, thank you guys so much, and I will see you again very soon.